And by the time we get to roll call, hopefully everybody will have logged in. So I need to go through my spiel, and I'll start that then right now. So it is June 8th at 6:02 p.m. and I'm calling this meeting to order. My name is John Mursky, and I am participating from my home here in Ann Arbor. Welcome to our meeting this evening, an electronic meeting of the Energy Commission. This virtual meeting is to affect social distancing and to mitigate the spread of the COVID-19 virus. We will conduct this meeting similarly to in-person meetings. Commissioners, please remain on camera just as you would be visible during in-person meetings. Also, mute your microphones when not speaking. Public comment will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call one of the following toll-free numbers: 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID number 913-5783-4502. By the way, these numbers remain the same for the entire year for the Energy Commission meetings. This information, along with 2 local dial-in numbers, is also available on the published agenda, in the public notices section of the city website, on the broadcast of this meeting, on CTN channel 816, which is AT&T channel 99, and online at www.a2gov.org/watchctn. So, Missy, would you please read the land acknowledgement?
Yeah, absolutely, Chair Mursky, thank you. I acknowledge that the land the city of Ann Arbor occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, including the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi, as well as Wyandot peoples. I further acknowledge that our city stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained generally in unconscionable ways from Indigenous peoples. The taking of this land was formalized by the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. Knowing where we live, work, study, and recreate does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our work to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals.
Thank you. Before we take the roll call, I'd just like to acknowledge that several commissioners' term has expired, and I would like to thank them for their service. So Mike Schreiberg, Teresa Hatcher, and Julian Singleton, all of them are stepping down from the commission, and I want to thank them very much for the time that they've devoted to the commission and work on energy matters. In particular, I want to call out Mike Schreiberg, who has served many, many years on the commission, going back all the way to working on the original 2012 Climate Action Plan. And I think all of you know that he's been a key part of the commission in its work the last several years. So thank you all very much. And with that, because of their absence and because of the fact that their terms are up, they obviously will not be here tonight, and that obviously is affecting who's going to be here. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And Missy, go ahead and do the roll call from here then.
Absolutely. Commissioner Hookham.
Sorry, Chuck Hookham, and my home in Ann Arbor. Good evening.
Great. And thank you for the excellent reminder. If you could please state the city that you're residing in. Commissioner McComber.
Present and joining from Arcadia, Michigan.
Great. Commissioner Clevey.
Present and here from my home in Ann Arbor.
Okay. Commissioner Levin.
Here at my home in Ann Arbor.
Chair Mursky.
Here, also from Ann Arbor.
Vice Chair Colvin Garcia.
Present and calling in from Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Councilmember Briggs.
Present and here in Ann Arbor. Once again, sorry that my video is not working.
Councilmember Radina.
Present here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Zucker.
Present from my home in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner McCoy.
Here and in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner George.
Here in the city of Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Kerber.
Larry, you're muted. But we see that you're here.
We know you're here.
We saw you saying present or whatever. It was.
Here, I'm here, coming in from Seattle.
Excellent. Chair Mirsky, you have 100% of sitting commissioners.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for everybody for attending. I think we're going to have a great meeting tonight. The first agenda item is, or I guess we've already had a couple of agenda items, but the next agenda item is public input. This is the first of two opportunities for residents or anyone for that matter to speak for up to 3 minutes. If you are watching on CTN, please call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 913-5783-4507. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and the video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand, so to speak, one by one, using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate you desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any background or television noise that we may hear you clearly. And finally, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Do we have anyone?
Not yet.
Not yet. Well, we know we have a delay of maybe 30 to 40 seconds, so we'll wait for someone to raise their hand.
Caller ending in 134. You should be able to speak. You can unmute your line.
Thank you, Dr. Stultz and Chair Mirsky. It's Ken Garber, 28 Haverhill Court. I have a question to ask really about the landfill solar project. I'm an outsider coming late to the discussion. I have to admit the language of the VGP, Voluntary Green Power Settlement, approved by City Council in April, is hard for me to really understand. So as I read it, the city will pay for the landfill solar project, but DTE will own it. The electricity that's generated will feed into the energy grid and be distributed throughout the DTE system. However, the city would become the so-called anchor tenant and will sign a long-term contract for the life of the asset. The city becomes a, quote, subscriber of last resort, unquote, for credits and recs issued from the project, but it would have the ability to sponsor community solar. I assume this means deciding which entities, for example, Pittsfield Township, get to pay DTE for recs or other credits based on solar generated electricity from the landfill. Any leftover credits the city would purchase. So as I understand it, city residents will pay, $40 to $50 million, which was the Black and Veatch estimate, to construct the 25 megawatt project that DTE will own and utilize. The city, as anchor tenant, decides who buys renewable energy credits from DTE, and we also agree to buy any leftover credits. So if I'm reading this right, DTE adds to its renewable portfolio at our expense. Of course, the public benefits by having a 25 megawatt solar facility added to the grid. But shouldn't DTE be doing more renewables anyway at its own cost? And are we missing an opportunity here? Paul Fenn, the speaker that we brought in back in March, suggested that the city establish a parallel utility, a franchise, a kind of mini muni that would start to compete with DTE on a small scale. Fenn said such a city-owned utility could be established fairly quickly, maybe within a year. Is there any possibility to incorporate a city-owned landfill solar project into such a parallel franchise? Just a question. Again, I might be misreading the settlement agreement, and I don't know how feasible this would be, or if the settlement agreement, by its very nature, basically locks us in to the arrangement that's outlined, the landfill solar pilot. So I welcome a discussion of why city ownership of the landfill is not feasible. Regardless, I hope you'll push for full transparency in the upcoming landfill talks so that the Public and Energy Commission can be informed and can participate. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ken.
Chair Mirsky, we do not have any other folks in the queue.
Okay. Maybe we can discuss some of these points later on in the meeting. Okay, so our first agenda point is an energy education update from Dave Conkle, former city staffer in the energy area and board member of GLREA. Do we have Dave with us?
Yeah, he was just being promoted, so he'll be
There he
here.
is.
Hello, hello.
Hello. Hey, Dave.
I got kicked off for a second, so I don't know exactly where you're ready for me now.
We are.
All right, and I can share my screen with this button down here.
Hopefully.
Yeah. All right, before I do, I just want to say hi to the Energy Commission members and introduce the fact that working with Missy from the very start of the A20 project, the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association has been a partner on a number of things. At one point, Missy asked for people who are interested in getting involved in community education, and I joined a group of people that are doing that. It is now, we've been meeting for a number of months. The group is pretty much myself. We've got the Hands-On Museum, the Leslie Science Center, and the Ann Arbor District Library are kind of the other people that are in this group that have been working towards some community education kinds of things. With the A20 kickoff week, we aimed with very little time to try to do a couple of activities. One which we did manage to pull off was, bringing back the Hands-On Museum Farmers Market kids exhibit that used to be on a kiosk at the farmers market, but with the Fifth Avenue reconstruction disappeared for a while, and we're busy bringing that back now. One of the activities that we've been pursuing is related to the fact that before the summer before COVID, we had been, Josh McDonald and I had been working with the Hands-On Museum and Leslie Science Center to do a STEM grant to bring a weeks-long renewable energy day camp to Ann Arbor. And we ran the first pilot of that the summer before COVID, and we had great results with that. And one of the activities that we did with that involved there were about 14 students in the 7th grade, give or take a grade or two, that were in this day camp. We walked them up to the top of the 4th and Washington parking deck to look out over the roofs of downtown Ann Arbor and asked them to look around for solar collectors and made a game out of it. So we started looking at utilizing this as perhaps an activity for the A20 week. The library is is going to incorporate it into their summer games, a whole renewable energy section of scavenger hunt and whatever their renewable games. We're moving forward with these things with the idea of adding more and more. Right now, we've been concentrating on downtown. They wanted to have a family activity where they could come to a section of downtown and park and walk around and have access, no locked doors, no anything, to these activities. And so I'm going to show you, it's the beginning of what we've come up with. So I'm going to try to share the screen, and somebody's going to give me a thumbs up or something when they can see what I'm talking about. Hopefully you can now.
We can.
All right. So what we've got is something that we're calling Downtown Ann Arbor's Invisible Solar, which is solar energy systems visible from the 4th and Washington parking structure roof deck. So we're working on the signage and everything that'll go along with this, but it's pretty simple. How do you do it? You go to the parking structure at 4th and Washington and you take the glass elevator up to the roof deck on the 7th floor, and then you can walk around the roof deck and look out in all directions, and you can start finding some solar energy systems. The roof deck has been fenced all the way around, so it's safe for families, kids, and even dogs. So what can you see from up there? Washtenaw County Courthouse put in some solar energy. From the roof deck, this is what it looks like. 4th and Washington to the county office building over there. It's a 10 kilowatt photovoltaic system that was built in 2011. I went over to the Ann Ashley parking roof deck and got some other pictures of it, because you can see it a little bit better from there. And that's when I discovered there's also a solar water heater on the county office buildings there. They supplied me with this picture of the water heater on their building that, provides hot water to their office building. Fire station number 1 has solar energy on it. That's right across the street from the police and courts building. From the parking structure, you can see it. It looks just like that. What it is a solar water heating system that was built in 2007 to heat the shower and wash water. This is the firemen live here, shower here, everything, and they really like hot water for washing the fire trucks off in the winter. This is a picture of it during its construction. This is a very famous picture that was put in the National Planning Magazine and came within inches of being the cover picture for Planning Magazine one month. But what happened was the crane that was supposed to lift these collectors to the roof didn't show up, and they ended up using the Ann Arbor ladder truck to raise these collectors to the roof of that building. Then we got a grant from the state and hired the Hands-On Museum to build an exhibit inside their museum to talk about how this water heater works and whatever. It had a real-time readout on temperatures of the water in the storage tanks and at the collectors. Very nice exhibit. City Hall actually has 3 separate solar energy systems on it, totaling 810 square feet on the police and courts, and another 520 square feet on the offices that were built in 2010. From the parking deck, you can see these collectors that are on the police and courts building, 1 of 2 systems that are there. One's 800 square feet of collectors that heat hot water for bathrooms and showers, and there's a second system that supplements space heating for police and courts. This system, which you can see these collectors from down on Huron Street on the Guy C. Larkham building, provide hot water for bathrooms and showers in the old City Hall building. The old A3C Architects building at 210 East Huron has these highly visible solar collectors from the 4th and Washington parking structure that were built there by A3C Architects in 2007, just to introduce green technology to their clients. They had something they called the Urban Retreat up on the roof. It was a glass-walled penthouse that had a solar demonstration and a living roof garden. and could be used by government and nonprofit groups. And I actually held a number of meetings in that when I worked for the city. This is a picture back to garden. The living garden is no longer there, but you can see it behind it. But this is what it looked like. There were 6 kilowatts demonstrating both standard rigid PV panels and thin film stick-on panels. The rooftop garden, and they actually have a geothermal heating system with wells that were drilled in the alley behind this building. The McKinley Town Center, way down in the right corner here, built a system that from the rooftop is barely visible at all. That's all you can see of it from the rooftop of the 4th and Washington parking structure. But a Google Earth picture of it shows the extensive solar energy that's on top of that building. This was a 19.8 kW solar photovoltaic system built in 2011, back when Google was negotiating an extended lease with McKinley. They wanted, one of the things they asked for was solar energy on the building, and McKinley came through with it. I worked for the DDA at the time, and we gave them, I think, a $20,000 grant towards paying for it. Arbor Brewing Company is just across the street from the 4th and Washington parking structure, and this is what you can see from there. There's 2 separate systems. On the left, a solar electric, just a 3 kW system that was used to power the pumps for the brewing process. And on the right is a bunch of evacuated tube solar water heating collectors to provide heat for the brewing process. Built in March in 2012. Got a couple of pictures of it being built, and then the owner, Matt Greff, up on the roof with that. This was the Arbor Brewing was the Ann Arbor's first solar-powered brewer, probably Michigan's first solar-powered brewery. And some people went on to make a career in designing solar-powered breweries after this installation. Again, this was another one that was subsidized by the Ann Arbor DDA at the time. All right, there's 2 other systems that would be visible from the 4th and Washington parking structure, but there's a building in the way, and those are the Farmers Market Solar and the solar carport at the 4th and Catherine surface lot. But you can see them easily from the ground. This is just a quick picture of what the Farmers Market Solar looked like, thin film solar collectors that were glued to the metal roof. This is a picture of it during construction. This is Mayor Heifja holding one of the roofing panels with the stick-on solar on it. We again, Hands-On Museum, we got a grant to hire Hands-On Museum to create this educational kiosk about the Farmers Market Solar. It had interactive buttons that kids could push to find out how much energy was being produced and how the system worked. And this is a big, heavy piece of bronze that is what's being saved, and we're working to get that not mounted in another kiosk like this, but mounted into the wall of the market office building itself on the outside, so people can come by, see it, realize there's solar energy at the market, and learn about it. Finally, the solar carport in the parking lot was built just a few years ago in 2018. It's 13.4 kW carport. It was at the time built as a demonstration of concept as the DDA was looking at the rooftops of all their parking structures and wondering how much solar they could possibly build on those rooftops. So we put this here as a demonstration and to learn about how they work. It has 3 publicly available electric car chargers underneath it, where public can come in and plug in their cars and run their cars with sunshine, 100% pollution-free carbon emission driving. And then just one last fun fact, in 2017, Ann Arbor was one of 13 cities that were in the first selection group to become a Solar America city. We received $400,000 in federal funds and support to implement $630,000 in a community-wide program to promote renewable energy in Ann Arbor. Mayor Heifja was quoted as saying, "This award is another indication that Ann Arbor is serious about achieving renewable energy goals and continuing our leadership." So that's, what we're trying to do is bring education and awareness, not only of what is in the city, but a lot of the history behind this effort that we are now pursuing in Ann Arbor to become carbon neutral by 2030. And I just thought I'd share that with you guys. I'd be surprised if you didn't learn something from that. That's my presentation. I'll take questions if you want.
Thanks, Dave. Anybody have any? Go ahead, Carlene.
That was great. I had no idea how extensive the history was, Dave. Thanks so much for informing us about that. I'm wondering if there's going to be any opportunities to provide on-site interactive educational displays. So like, for example, at the Northside Community Center installation, or other areas throughout the city that are planned, like the resiliency centers that are going to be going in.
The way we're feeling right now, the people that are involved in this group from the library and from Leslie Science Center, Hands-On Museum are all really enthusiastic about this, and we're just this is our first toe dips here. What I showed you, we think it can go a long ways, and we think that what we'll warn Missy now. We think that as we move forward, we'll be presenting some form of a grant application to say, let us expand this out further. And certainly things like Northside Community Center, there are many spots around the city where people could become aware that we've already been doing some solar there and learn how it can be utilized, in their own lives.
Commissioner Clevey.
David, how were the grant funds that you mentioned, the $650,000? Was that allocated to these projects, or how else was that spent? Do you know? Is there any left?
Yeah, I don't. Those grant funds came just as I was leaving. So, you'll be happy to hear the Clean Energy Coalition was heavily involved in how those were spent. Part of it was spent, 140,000 of it or so was spent to Clean Energy Coalition for a solar plan for the city. Another large chunk of money was spent for a small solar energy system on top of the Michigan Theater. I was not around for how that, where all that money went, but it did. The point here is to just say that, what Missy has done is come along and kick this up to the next level or three. But Ann Arbor has been working at it for quite a while.
Councilmember Briggs.
Thanks. Yeah, great presentation. Definitely learned a lot. It seems like from the dates that, at least for the downtown solar, there was kind of a big boom kind of in the around 2007 to 2012. And then there's been, at least from the view of the 4th and Washington deck, a little bit of stagnation. And so just curious if any thoughts on why kind of the downtown business solar, hasn't continued.
As soon as I retired from the city of Ann Arbor in 2008, I got hired both by the Downtown Development Authority to run a downtown energy program, and by ICLEI, to run their National Energy Office program. But what it meant was that Downtown Development Authority was heavily involved in energy programs for the 4 or 5 years that I was working with them. And we did, 140 audits of downtown businesses. We followed that up with a 50% support up to $20,000 for energy improvements at those businesses. And a number of those businesses used that $20,000 towards putting solar energy on their roofs as one of the things they did. So I think that some of that is because we had incentives available. Anybody will tell you, anytime you want to give out incentives, actual money, people like it.
Thanks.
Commissioner McCoy, please.
Yeah, that was great information. I definitely didn't know a lot of it. My comment is more of a sad update to the presentation, at least for me personally, but my understanding is that Ann Arbor Brewing Co. closed last year, their downtown Ann Arbor location. So it's cool to know that they were brewing with the with the solar panels, and I hope whoever moves into there, if they haven't already, is able to utilize those as well and can be an attractive thing to them. But yeah.
Thanks for the comment. Anyone else? I just have a quick comment. Dave, look, judging by some of those shots, you'll need to also mount a little telescope there at the top of the Washington parking deck. And maybe we need to have one of those mountain-like panorama signs where you can look at all the peaks and they point out where this is this system and that system. So, and one last comment from my side. My recollection is, and maybe you can confirm this, Dave, Mayor Heefja, I think around 2005, declared a goal of 5,000 solar installations in Ann Arbor by 2015. And I think we probably got maybe a tenth of that if we were lucky. And to Councilmember Briggs's question, certainly one of the issues was, if you look back at solar pricing per watt back in that time frame, the people that were doing this for altruistic purposes for the most part, because there really wasn't particularly a great financial payback. And that's probably another reason why we saw a drop off in installations, not only downtown, but just in general across the city. So those are just some thoughts from my side. I can see that Commissioner Clevey also has a comment.
Just a quick thing on Ann Arbor Brewing. I think there's somebody on Missy's staff or someplace. I think we have an opportunity here to see if solar improves the real estate value of a building, or what impact, if anything, it has on a commercial building. I don't know if they've moved that array, or they're going to move that array, or if they're just going to leave it as part of the building and include it in the sale. But it would be interesting to see what impact, if any, it had. I know on David's house, for example, he had some difficulty selling the house because people didn't know how to manage it or run it, et cetera. So, what impact, if any, hopefully positive impact, it has on the sale of that building. Because it would be an interesting question to get asked and answered.
Does anybody know, is the building for sale, or is it just up for lease right now? I don't know. By the way, I would also note that if I'm not mistaken, Commissioner Clevey and former Commissioner Appleyard and maybe some others, maybe Commissioner Hookham, helped put solar on the rooftop of the Arbor Brewing facility in Ipsy. Isn't that right, Mark? Chuck?
My PE stamps on both systems. I ended up taking over interesting collaboration of parts and pieces in Matt Greff's basement to put that up on the roof and get it built with another gentleman. So I'll take a little bit of credit for it. My knowledge is that that's a lease building, and I'm not sure if it's attached, but we did a pretty solid job of attaching the solar. Somebody's gonna have a hard time taking it off.
Well, good. It just shows that there were some people that were very active to get those initial solar installations up and running. And it's great that we have Julie doing the Solarize program, and she reported today in a webinar how numbers are really just going out of the roof. So I think she's going to present again in 2 weeks, if she's not, Missy, on the implementing A2.0 at noon, and I think give a fuller update on Solarize. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, I can share that after the meeting with the commissioners.
Yep. Okay. Thank you very much, Dave. Thanks for all the good work, and we're looking forward to see what finally the product is, and hopefully what that does then in terms of accelerating additional installations. So the next point on our agenda is a proposed resolution, and we have two guests. So this is a resolution on low embodied carbon materials in construction. And we're going to have a short presentation from Jan Culbertson and from Luca Henrion. And then I will, or together the three of us will introduce the language of the resolution and walk ourselves through it. And the idea would be that we would vote on it. We could vote on it tonight, but depending on the discussion, we may postpone that until the next meeting. So Jan or Luca, I think Luca, you're the one starting off, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but if you
thanks so
could
much,
share
John.
if I could share the screen, that would be great.
Yep, Jan, go ahead.
Hold on. You should be good now, Jan.
I would ask that both of you introduce yourselves. I don't know if that was part of the plan anyhow, but
yeah.
Great.
Wonderful. Well, as Chairman Mirsky said, my name is Luca Henrian. I am a postdoctoral research fellow in the Global CO2 Initiative. In the audience today, we have Alexander Reese, who will be assisting on behalf of the Global CO2 Initiative with this as well. Jan, if you want to introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jan Culbertson. I'm leadership chair of the Ann Arbor 2030 district and an architect.
And Jan was, by the way, was responsible for a lot of those installations that we saw in the former A3C office building. So thank you, Jan. Go ahead, Luca.
All righty. Well, thank you all so much for having us today. Jan, if you want to go to the next slide. We wanted to briefly explain to you how this resolution came about. So as I said, I work at the Global CO2 Initiative at the University of Michigan, which is an on-campus initiative. If you want to go to the next slide, I have a little bit of information about it. Our mission is to get CO2 capture and use recognized and implemented as a mainstream climate solution. As a global umbrella organization, we convene and accelerate research, development, and deployment by working with research organizations, which are in the academic, governmental, and commercial space. And we work with funding sources as well, so angel investors, institutional investors, government and commercial investors throughout the world. My work in the Global CO2 Initiative has been working on local, state, and federal policies that support carbon capture and utilization. In this work, we have focused on the construction sector. Jan, you want to go to the next slide? So here you'll see a diagram that shows what are the market potentials and the gigaton CO2 mitigation potentials for CO2-based products. This is a roadmap study that the Global CO2 Initiative has put together, and you'll see that I highlighted in red boxes concrete and aggregates, which are both important sectors in the construction space. And so we see a strong potential in the construction sector for carbon reduction and storage. As I reviewed policies that are affecting this, I saw a lot of different movement, but I had seen some small resolutions that have been quite effective in helping promote the use of lower embodied carbon materials. One of the really effective ones had been coming out of a village in New York, and they had begun with a small resolution that had led to some projects in the city actually reducing their embodied emissions through their newer projects. And I thought that a similar resolution in Ann Arbor could motivate action on this often overlooked piece of the emissions. I presented this idea to Chair Mirsky, and he was interested in it, and he connected me with Jan Culbertson, as she was undertaking a similar project on behalf of the Ann Arbor 2030 district. So both the Global CO2 Initiative and Ann Arbor 2030 have been working on acknowledging and finding methods to reduce the embodied emissions of construction materials. To do this, we came up with 3 important steps. First, we need to find ways to highlight the importance of embodied emissions, which Jan will talk about. Then we wanted to find ways to develop local expertise and local methods to reducing these emissions. And then finally, we wanted to find the best ways of communicating these widely. So first things first, Jan will provide an overview of the embodied emissions, especially as they relate to construction materials.
Thank you, Luca. And really, there are pieces, most people are really familiar with operational carbon. That's the building energy consumption, which also includes water use. And then embodied carbon, though, is a little bit newer that we're kind of looking at and being able to quantify. And that's the manufacture, transport, installation of construction materials. Life cycle tends to also include the full life cycle of building materials. Most people are pretty familiar with this pie chart by now about the global CO2 emissions by sector, but if you look at it, building materials and construction is a full 11% of global CO2 emissions. And why, that's kind of small, but why is that important? And basically, as we really work on reducing our operational energy, the slice of pie of embodied energy does not change. And so it becomes a much bigger piece. And there have been some calculations done from 2020 to 2050. If we continue to build as we have always built, that operational carbon would be as big as the embodied carbon. The embodied carbon would be almost as large as the operational carbon. So it's really important to start paying attention to this because we're building now and that embodied carbon stays forever. Strategies. Reuse our buildings, don't tear them down, reduce the embodied carbon in the materials in new construction and renovation, and then sequester carbon in building materials and building operations. This is sort of an interesting graph, and it talks about if you decouple the material impact from volumes, you really see that, like PVC and some of the plastics have a much higher impact than concrete. But what you also have to factor in is how much of that material is used. And concrete is huge. It's used all over the globe. And so in the 2030 district, and as architects, you start with the stuff that you can make the biggest impact, the biggest reduction. And the building structure and substructure is about 55% of a building's carbon footprint. And we're talking about mostly commercial buildings here. And the building enclosure is another 33%. So that really led me to think about, well, how do we, building structure and substructure, the highest embodied carbon, concrete and steel.
Wonderful. Yeah, and to emphasize that, I mean, concrete is one of the most important and widely used resources in the world. And so obviously, just the volume that it's used in is the reason that the embodied energy is such an important component of that, embodied carbon, excuse me. One of the most effective methods that we have seen to actually help reducing these emissions is to assemble groups of stakeholders across the sort of construction landscape to have them all communicate on what is currently available and what will work. And we were lucky, and I was really lucky to meet Jan, and that she was working with the AIA of Huron Valley, the Washtenaw Contractors Association, and the A2 2030 District in assembling a group of these stakeholders. And the group's primary charge was to develop recommendations for concrete and steel specifications that will lower embodied carbons in our steel. This group assembled different ways to reduce embodied emissions in concrete using locally available methods, so methods that we can use today. And the group even went as far as creating a local best practice that we've been able to test. And Jan will provide you more insight on the sort of results of this task force.
All right, so we gave the task force a charge to develop recommendations for concrete specification that will immediately reduce the embodied carbon in concrete, and then also develop recommendations that may need further research and market transformation or before we could actually implement them. And then also to discuss policies that would reinforce and promote these materials. So we did do an initial presentation, and there's a link to the full presentation that we did it's about a month ago. And this is sort of the task force. And what I learned with this task force is you really have to get together owners, the designers, the engineers, and also the researchers have been wonderful, and the contractors, and we pulled in associations. And so what we went after is this is basically cement is the big black person and black, I shouldn't say black, the big sort of dark shadow around embodied carbon. And it's about 13% of a typical concrete mix, but it has a full 70, almost 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions in it. So a ton of cement equals a ton of CO2. And one of the first recommendations is there's a different type of cement. It's called limestone cement. And we found that it was actually being manufactured up in Charlevoix in Michigan. And what it does is it increases the limestone from about 5% component to about 15% component. And it's accepted by the Department of Transportation, et cetera. The other thing is if you specify well-graded aggregate, okay, this is different size stones, right? You don't have as much volume of cement in the mix as well. And then we're already using some supplementary cementitious materials, so it was interested in looking at them. And we found out that fly ash, which is in a lot of specification, is really hard to get right now. And as the coal plants are closing, it's going to be even harder to get, although they're thinking about perhaps mining some of the fly ash that's been buried, but it would have to go through a whole process to be able to be used. Also, slag, which is the next supplementary cementitious material, is like more readily available, but we also found out that it's often the best slag is from blast furnaces, and we're trying to get the conversion of the steel industry into electric arc furnaces because it reduces the CO2 emissions by about 50% just by using a different furnace. And as steel production moves to the electric arc furnaces, slag may be a little harder to get. And we also found out that slag is being imported as far away from us as Turkey. So that's kind of disappointing. And so what we found was evolving to use recycled materials, and one of the one that is closest to, it's actually being produced in Connecticut right now. That was the only one we could find that was actually in production in the country, but it uses 100% post-consumer glass, and it's processed and used not only in cement, but some other materials. So we're working with that company presently and doing some testing and hopefully look at a feasibility of bringing that into southeastern Michigan. We looked briefly at what was the reduction that we could get now, and it was about a 37% reduction if we, one, used the Portland limestone cement, used slag, and then also looked at what the projection was if we used a ground glass pozzolan. And we think we can get, with the ground glass pozzolan, about a 50% reduction in the embodied carbon in concrete. How much is that? Okay, well, here's a building that is going to be constructed in Ann Arbor, and we calculated that there was about 3,000 cubic yards. 40, if we did just the 40% replacement, this isn't doing ground glass pozzolan, we'd have the equivalent of a car circling the earth 38 times or powering almost all of Ann Arbor for about 11 hours. So that's in one building. So there's a significant amount of CO2 reduction that we can make by just changing how we specify our concrete. Another opportunity that is being worked on is how our urban trees are being processed. And if you chip a tree, you kind of, that carbon is released. So what is the best way that we can kind of keep that carbon sequestered? And that is processing the urban lumber that currently now mostly gets shipped and turn it into usable materials. So there is a Urban Ashes, if some of you are familiar with them, they're working with the city to look at a different type of model for how wood is used in the city. So those are two examples dealing with what would be waste and also dealing with directly changing our specifications. There we go.
All righty. Now that we've talked about the embodied carbon and the importance of it and the task force and the results that we've seen, the important step now is how do we widely communicate the importance of embodied emissions and methods to reduce these emissions? Slide. So we arrive finally at this resolution that we're really excited to be sharing with you all today, which in addition to some of the work that we do in the task force at the Global CO2 Initiative, and that a lot of researchers and stakeholders within the space are doing nationwide, we hope that this will help communicate the importance of embodied emissions to this broader audience and cause some action, and hopefully here in Ann Arbor. This is our adoption curve, and we're hoping that pieces like our resolution and work of the task force will help people be early adopters in these types of technologies in Ann Arbor so that we'll get that local expertise. It was really exciting to see that presentation of solar projects over Ann Arbor. I'd be really happy to see low embodied carbon concretes all over the city, and people can go to the top of the bridge deck, and instead of looking for solar power panels, they'll be looking down at the concrete below them, which could be using recycled materials, recycled glass, storing CO2 in itself. And so that'll be really exciting. Slide. We're lucky that this type of work is actually being performed nationwide. So in the top left here, we have Marin County. It's in the Bay Area. They have a low carbon concrete code. They have a specific county code that allows them to have a higher threshold for embodied carbon. The village of Hastings-on-Hudson on the top right, they have a low embodied carbon resolution similar to the one that we'll be presenting today. And they have this resource page where they provide opportunities for people to find out more about how they can reduce their the embodied carbon in their concretes. The bottom left, we have Portland, which has been working on a low carbon concrete initiative where they piloted some new low carbon mixes for their sidewalks. And then finally, Buy Clean California, which is a statewide policy which sets an upper threshold on embodied carbon. Unfortunately, Buy Clean doesn't have concrete in it currently, but it has a lot of important building materials, and it sets an upper threshold for the embodied carbon in those materials. Slide. One of the important pieces of this resolution is the creation of a resource guide. We're hoping that the resource guide will be hosted by the city and that it will answer some of the practical questions of actually using embodied carbon. So here we would outline what's currently happened, what are the locally available solutions, but also highlight new potential technologies and highlight local projects that are actually using these and provide some answers to the questions that people have when they start getting ready to tackle the problem of embodied carbon. We hope this guide, in conjunction with this resolution, will ease the adoption of currently available low embodied mixes and eventually will lead to the utilization of CO2 as a component of concrete, especially in Ann Arbor. We hope to bring attention to the work of the task force and continue to grow local expertise on methods of reducing emissions. And I'm really happy to introduce this resolution, as I truly believe it is a complementary piece to the plans for Ann Arbor to address the burden of climate change. Given all the local stakeholders and worldwide experts in the Ann Arbor, Detroit area, we are really well suited to be ground zero for a revolution in low embodied carbon construction. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you, Luca. Jan. Go ahead, Jan. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to also say that this is becoming very much a part of both structural engineers practice and architects practice. So I don't want people to think that there aren't resources out there and that it'll be more expensive or more extensive to be able to do this. SE 2050 is structural engineers. It has all sorts of resources around that engineers can use to lower embodied carbon in both steel and concrete. Tally has a lot of free webinars. The EC3 is a free tool that talks about life cycle analysis. They also have a tremendous amount of resources there. Architecture 2030 has a materials palette that they're developing. The Boston Society of Architects has a week-long course that you can take just in embodied carbon. So it is really front and center of building design and practice at this point. So I would really encourage Ann Arbor to take the lead, because if we're going to work on this transformation, it really does need owners to be drivers. Thank you.
Great. So what we'd like to do now is share the draft resolution with you and talk through it, get your comments on it, and we'll talk at the end about potentially taking a vote on it. Missy, can you share the resolution?
Yeah, hold on. I'm just trying to download it in the background. Do you want the one as posted, correct?
Well, I can show, I have the one that is the original one that's posted, also with highlighted potential amendment that we posted. Just the idea to change it came up last night and was confirmed this morning. I have it, I can share it, or if you have it, that's fine.
Yeah, if you give me a second, I'm just gonna pull it up here.
Okay, great.
Do you want to talk through it while I get it ready for you?
Yeah, I'll just talk through a little bit real quickly first. So this was a process that lasted probably, Luca, what, a good 6 or 8 months?
Something like that, yeah.
So we sent an original draft of the resolution to Missy to look at and to also share with others within the city. Then there was this task force that was created, and it met several times. An output of the task force was the idea of this resource guide. So that was changed, or I should say added to the resolution. So I can see it, so I'm assuming everyone else can see it. Looks like it, yes. So it's rather long. I don't want to read through it word for word. Hopefully everybody can do that. So the first portion is basically just some high level recognition of some basic issues related to climate change and reason for climate change. If you can go back real quickly or a little bit, Missy, the one thing that we wanted to change compared to what is shown on Legistar is this whereas clause that is highlighted in yellow. So the original formulation is crossed out. That was what is posted on Legistar. But I suggested last night that we modify this based on actually essentially the same document that's quoted in or referenced in the other whereas clause. And I just wanted to point this out, that there is within the 2018 IPCC report, there is a carbon budget that is based on a 67% probability of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. And if you use that as a basis and take into consideration the rate at which we are releasing carbon into the atmosphere for the last couple of years, basically we're now at the point where CO2 emissions have to be reduced by 65% by 2030 and to net zero by 2040 to meet that 67% probability of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. And I just wanted to point that out because typically in the public domain, even amongst ourselves, we're talking about 50% reductions by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050. And actually the situation is a lot more urgent and dire than that. I also call your attention to the email that I sent out linking to an article this afternoon. So Basically, this now transitions into what we're doing in Ann Arbor. We talk a lot about concrete, and we talk about, whoa. Can you go back and see? Yeah. So, concrete and steel making up the major portions of that. Some analysis from McKinsey, which I think we all know is a consulting company, showing what the percentages are of contribution to emissions. Obviously, what Jan said before, concrete is the most widely used construction material in the world, particularly in China. I think I read not long ago that China, in just a handful of years, used more concrete than what the United States has used in something like the last century. So this is a global issue, and anything we can do here will certainly lead to the impetus to other entities and countries around the world doing things. It outlines here, you can see in the center about the importance of cement and what we're trying to control here. This new category of low embodied carbon and how it's defined, and it's measured by the global warming potential, which is, I think, everybody's familiar with. Then some of the strategies are outlined here that Jan covered at the bottom of the page. And obviously that by employing these techniques, that there are some higher costs, but they can be offset by lower material costs, and then transitions towards the bottom to talking a little bit about steel and what we can do to reduce embodied carbon in steel. And then basically now we're getting into a little bit more background information in terms of how this can relate to the state of Michigan. And you can see about referencing the Global CO2 Initiative and what it's doing at the University of Michigan. And what I talked about and what Luca talked about earlier is helping to develop this resource guide and hosting that through the city of Ann Arbor, not only just for the city's use, but hopefully also for the university and other entities in the region and hopefully at the state. And then also the involvement of the AIA local group here in Huron Valley, the Contractors Association, et cetera. And then finally, we want to be a leader. What Lucas said, we want to be sort of an early adopter and push the curve. So here are the resolve clauses. And I guess I can read them aloud so people that are listening can hear the key elements. Resolved, the Energy Commission requests Ann Arbor City Council to direct the city of Ann Arbor so that it encourages and will work to promote the use of low embodied building materials in building and infrastructure projects involving concrete and steel, where the utilization of these materials does not significantly increase the costs of or delay project completion, and where utilization does not compromise either construction integrity or public safety. And be it further resolved, the promotion of low embodied carbon materials could include, but may not be limited to, identifying and highlighting local low embodied carbon concrete and steel product options, making embodied carbon materials, educational materials more accessible, recognizing local projects utilizing low embodied carbon products, promoting other low embodied carbon strategies like the use of high recycled material content materials and the use of mass timber, which is also referred to as cross-laminated timber, when appropriate, and sharing Ann Arbor's program successes and lessons learned with other towns and local governments in the state and region. And be it further resolved, the Energy Commission requests Ann Arbor City Council to direct the city of Ann Arbor to engage in work encouraging the city planning department and commission to urge developers and property users to reuse and repurpose existing buildings as a means of minimizing the net total carbon footprint of construction. And be it further resolved that the Energy Commission requires Ann Arbor City Council to direct the city of Ann Arbor to lobby the state and other entities such as the University of Michigan and the Washtenaw County Road Commission to adopt low embodied carbon strategies related to the built environment. So that is the proposed resolution. Can we get someone to, here, I've got, first of all, let's get someone to move to consider this in a second, and then we'll open it up for discussion, assuming people are willing to do that today. Can we get, so a motion from Commissioner Clevey, a second from someone? From Commissioner Zucker. So let's open things up for comments and discussion. Commissioner Clevey.
I think Commissioner Hookham was before me.
Okay, go ahead, Chuck.
You can go, Mark, if you'd like. It doesn't matter. Just a couple things. I wished I would have known about this. There's a large movement afoot. I think Missy's aware of it. It's ASCE's got a standard on infrastructure that's coming out on sustainable infrastructure. I've mentioned it in the past. There's been a tremendous amount of work. I saw some alignment with what's been done to date by what was presented earlier. There is a tremendous amount more information that's available. I think Jan pointed some of it out. I'm part of SC 2050. There's, like I said, a ton of information out there. One of your resolutions is great, which is avoidance. We're all focused on this. If we can avoid infrastructure construction, we avoided the whole CO2 piece. Right. I think we need to really focus on that and the whole concept of our capital improvements program. I know, Mark, you've looked at that in the past. Why not have tougher screening with carbon? I mean, that's one way to get rid of some of these issues right out of the block. I think that'll go a long way. On the private side, certainly some of the things mentioned are great. I have had a lot of discussions with the Ready Mix Institute, a lot of work with the structural engineering side. A few things in our resolution are cross-tied across disciplines. We've talked a lot about buildings. What about the rest of infrastructure? We've got roads, pavements, all kinds of things, transportation infrastructure, where CO2 is important. We could really do a good job of reducing our carbon footprint in those spaces. Also, the thing that we've really looked at a national level is not just the embodied carbon, but also all the other greenhouse gases that come into play. When you're working on an existing building, when you're working on an existing car, you're dealing with refrigerants that are tremendously bad. We replaced CFCs with HFCs. HFCs we did for a reason because they're not such a harmful element to the ozone layer, but HFCs are a big greenhouse gas, and we need to take steps in that process, not just carbon, but all kinds of other bad actors that are out there that are part of the program. We mentioned nitrous oxide, that's out there, that's found in all kinds of products we need to worry about. SF6, sodium hexafluoride, is a really bad gas that's in a lot of our electrical equipment. We're making strides there. So I think we need to look at the resolution a little broader, talk about some other things that we could really tackle to make it a broader based approach, what could really hit home locally. I could probably talk for a few hours on this, but I'll stop. I would like to be a part of it going forward. Like I said, the ASCE 7 is going to have a lot of information that's replicable, could be adopted right out of the box here for the city. I know nobody's seen it yet. It went through public ballot. It's going to be published here shortly as a standard, but I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thanks. Commissioner Clevey, then Councilmember Briggs, then Councilmember George. I think that's what I'll do.
I just want to pick up on Lucas' statement about accelerating the innovation cycle and curve, because I think part of what we're faced here with is adoption barriers, and we can't afford, sort of business as usual adoption for these kinds of technologies. So bear with me just a moment to put that in perspective. In 1995, I was hired as a consultant to the National Institute of Standards and Technology that was creating a large grant program called Advanced Technology Program. And I was brought in to work with the Michigan Concrete Association and Portland Cement and others to craft research funding programs to look at ways to embed other things like ground glass and other things in. So, we've looked at the science of this back to 1995, and here we are in almost 2025, and we're still talking about adoption cycles. So I guess I love everything in this, and I agree with everything that's said. I would agree with Chuck that I think we need to broaden it a bit, but I would suggest that we pick up on the innovation part of the Office of Sustainability and Innovation and embed innovation into this resolution, and not use language like promote, but ask the departments to develop innovative ways to implement. So I think that having an assessment, embedded energies assessment, or embedded pollution assessment as part of the purchasing program for the city makes an awful lot of sense. But I think if we're going to have the city push on this, we need to move beyond education, because education is got us into a 50-year adoption cycle on technologies, and we can't afford that anymore. It's been 50 years since almost 50 years now since I did the solar project with DTE and Consumers Energy and Lansing Board of Water and Light to do the first utility interconnected solar PV thing in the state. And we're still talking about whether this is going to destroy the utility system if we plug solar into the system. This is where cities can make a difference. We're not going to invent new stuff. We're going to do those things. But we do have impact on the innovation cycle and the adoption cycle. So I think we need to get the word innovation into this. I think we need to ask the individuals to work with the Office of Sustainability and Innovation to develop innovative new policies, how these planning department, how these other departments work, how exactly are they going to do this? I'm not interested in education promotion. I want to see how they change their way of doing business to make sure that this embedded carbon issue gets addressed and nothing gets built forward where it isn't addressed. So I would say let's stop being so passive on what we're doing here. We know what needs to get done. We need to crank the system up, force it to react. We have an Office of Sustainability and Innovation, and let's unleash this innovation part of that office and let's get this done. And next year, let's find out, have Jan back and find out, what difference was made in the buildings that were built, and really push this thing. Be a resolution with action, not a resolution with let's promote and educate.
Councilmember Briggs.
Thank you. So great presentation. I learned a ton, and appreciate all the resources. I'm definitely going to be doing some more reading on my own. And a few points I think as we begin to work on this, it may be helpful to break some of it apart as a memo and some of it kind of reduce the resolution and really focus in on what are the key resolved clauses that we want to drive home. There's I understand the point that Mark was just making around not wanting to focus too much just on education, but getting things done. I do think we have to be cognizant of the sort of the framework that we're operating in terms of the tools that we have as a state and also the planning department has. We can't require anything from the planning commission side. And so it's a lot of incentivizing. And so education does become really helpful. I know when I was serving on planning commission, a lot of times just the fact that commissioners began to talk about things over and over again really did has begun to shift what kinds of projects we're seeing in the city. But I do have a little bit of concern around the third resolved clause, which is around reusing and repurposing existing buildings, which is great. I think we all know how important that is. But I also think we are different than Hastings on Hudson in terms of the framework in which this is going to come into and the discussions that are currently happening locally, kind of the context that a resolution like this might fall into. I think we need to be realistic about the existing conversations that are happening and how, quite honestly, how this resolution might be used and how it might be weaponized, honestly. And that is that we are having huge debates around development in our community. We're having huge debates around transportation and how we should transform our transportation network. And so I would love to see maybe a little bit more work or a little more thought given to including within this how, for example, to use an example that came up at Planning Commission last night, there were large debates around Valhalla development. I don't know how many folks have been following that, but it was a 454 unit development that was on South Main Street, close to kind of bushes over that way, and a lot of questions about the density of that development, a lot of the benefits of having more people live closer to where they work and not have to commute as far. And so what I don't want to see us do in Ann Arbor is start kind of pitting these silos against each other, sort of construction versus transportation emissions. And I think we have to figure out how we can talk, complement how these conversations kind of complement each other, and also start talking honestly about the trade-offs. Because those are what kind of, I think, where many in the community are ready to go with this as well. How much more beneficial it is it to build a large development closer where people work and where they can live car-free lifestyles versus the embodied carbon in a building. And then on transportation side, I am really excited to see work being considered around rebuilding our infrastructure system. But I can imagine every project now coming forward and having conversations around, well, the embodied carbon in that concrete is actually derailing our transportation or our carbon neutrality goals. So sorry, being very long-winded, but these are some of my concerns, and I think this is great and I'm super excited about it, and we have to start talking about it, but I just kind of wanted to start weaving some of those other ideas into this as well.
Thank you, Commissioner George.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to echo some of the councilwoman's points that she made, but before I do that, I want to thank our two presenters there. I also learned a lot from that, and I appreciate the time that you put into that. For context, I work for a construction union on the management side at our state council, and one of the main things that my members do, we represent 13,000 people across the state of Michigan, and we build things. And a lot of the work that we do is concrete and steel related. So, when we're talking about these types of things, this is very both personal for my perspective as something that I see on a day-to-day basis, and as something that I know affects a lot of livelihoods across the state. So I want to kind of start out with that type of context. I had a couple of questions for our presenters. I didn't know, I hope I didn't miss the question section of that, but I did want to ask either Luca or Jan, if you did some sort of a cost comparison for some of those alternatives to cement. I know you mentioned cost there a little bit at the end, but I was just curious if you had some sort of, maybe a top line kind of statistic for cost.
Yeah, that's a good question. And we don't have costs for the ground glass pozzolan, but the limestone cement option, limestone cement is slightly more expensive right now, but if you use less cement, the mixes as a whole they're pretty neutral as far as costs go. And the goal would be, and MCA says they want to roll this out and make sure that the PLC is used almost universally around the state within a year. That's one of their goals. And they actually, because of this task force, implemented their own task force. So we're really trying to, like Mark said, some of this stuff has been known forever, but it hasn't been implemented in the market. And that's what's critical. And it's got to be owners, and it's got to be designers with their specifications, really, really changing it. So, and cost is important. And that's why we had owners in the group.
Gotcha. Yeah, I recognized a couple of the contractors that you listed there on the screen are a couple of our signatory contractors. So it's great to see that. And, I think that, that's great to hear on the movement that you're referencing there, Jen. And especially, I also wanted to ask that question in the context of, as some folks probably know, the construction industry has, like many other commodity impacted industries, that there have been a huge uptick in costs, partially driven by general commodities as well as labor shortages, because everybody seems to want to build right now. That's very good to know that it's basically cost neutral, and even if it's marginally more expensive, that the savings on the carbon side would outweigh that. But I would say that when we're talking more broadly to folks, when we're trying to broaden this coalition, really trying to make sure that that is spoken about in a way that is inclusive, because when people say people say that projects are too expensive and so forth, they often want to cut on the labor side. We want to make sure that we're not having a lose-lose situation here. So I did want to mention that briefly. I also wanted to mention that in the responsible contracting policy that the city enacted last year, there was green language in it in the draft form. And then it never made it into the language that the city council enacted. So I really wasn't quite sure why I didn't make it out, but there was language in that. And I don't know where it went. I don't know, maybe Missy, if that's something that you could maybe find out and maybe dig a little deeper on. I don't know how broad it was, but I know there was a section about green items in it that didn't make the final cut. So, and then I also just wanted to make a point. I also share the councilwoman's concerns about the third resolve section. I've seen this a lot from two different angles. One, from the concern that, we're trying to stop development because of the environmental impacts of that, which is extremely unequitable for a city like Ann Arbor and the areas that surround the city when we are facing housing and apartment shortages across the area. As someone that rents, as part of the majority of Ann Arbor citizens that rent in this city, that as we're seeing rent prices go up every single year, sometimes significantly over 5 or 6% because of the demand. And so the idea that we need to reduce or significantly curtail new construction is, frankly, it seems like that the generation that was able to buy in and buy houses in the city is able to say that, whereas the generations that have come after them haven't had that same opportunity. It seems extremely unequitable to me. And as someone that wants to see the city continue to grow, and we've added 6,000 new residents since the last census, and calculations there, that we need to be cognizant of that when we're having these conversations. And when I walk around downtown and walk around the city, I don't see a lot of buildings that can be reused, frankly speaking. So I want to make sure that what the councilwoman said about it being weaponized, especially if it would be great if we could avoid the development debates on council, if at all possible, with something like this, and focus on some of those solutions that were proposed, and about that resource bank. That is where I would love to see this resolution really focused on. So I do apologize for the length of my comments, but I wanted to make sure I got a lot of that across. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Great comments. Chuck, and then Mark, and then I'd like also to provide an opportunity for Luca and Jan to comment on maybe some of the more important questions and comments that have been made. Go ahead, Commissioner Hookham.
So for Robert's question on substitute materials on cement, like a dry fly ash or ground granulated blast furnace slag, those are almost net zero. So the cost to replace cement with some of these products is effectively nil. To mine the fly ash that exists in the ground today, which is a substantial source, unfortunately produces more carbon in mining it. So you have to look at what I'll call a carbon balance when you're looking at a system. Somebody brought this up earlier. You have to balance whether it's prudent to do one thing at the behest of something else. So I think we have to be cautious on those things. It's a little bit scientific. I will take us to task on this concept of, has the city grown enough? I think we've invested a lot in the city. We're trying to lead by example. I share your concern about housing being limited. I think we really need to look at it. The density piece is important, but I really think we need to start focusing on, have we grown enough? We've built these green zones around the city. where is our carbon footprint going to end? If we keep allowing growth, we need to consider that. And I think equity comes into play, but I think we really need to focus. If we're going to march to the drum of we need to reduce carbon, we might need to consider whether we're in the right position to offer that up or not. So I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Commissioner Clevey.
I just thought I would inject a little bit of levity into this conversation. Back in the 1990s, the National Institute of Standards Technology had me under contract to go around and do a series of seminars on their new funding program to do research on cement. And so people I had in the audience were PhD people with cement. And anyway, this is one of the jokes that somebody from the audience told me about this. And here's the question. What can a really, really, really small duck teach us about cement? Yeah, you want to take a shot at that?
You got me stumped.
Chuck, I can't believe again. Micro quacks. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Well, hopefully that won't be an issue with these new materials, either in steel or concrete. Luke and Jan, do you want to respond to some of the questions and comments?
I would be happy to hop in. Member Hookham and Clevey, thank you so much for your comments. You both mentioned HFCs and CFCs. And I think that's definitely a component of it. I think one of the ways that currently exist to calculate and measure embodied emissions is the environmental product declaration. That's sort of a standardized procedure, a nutrition label for your different building materials. And in that, it includes not just your global warming potential, but it obviously also includes, like hydrogen and HFCs and nitrogen and ozone as well. So I think that would be a good way as an existing framework that would allow those things to be considered as well in the procurement process. If a policy that was looking to be sort of more than educational was looking for a way to do that and consider more than just CO2, the environmental product declaration would be definitely the direction that I would point you in. I think on the third statement in the resolution, I think for us, one of the things that we've noticed just, as a researcher, one of the things that I've noticed a lot is that there's a lot of embodied energy in repair of construction as well. And obviously in new buildings, there's an enormous input. And so I think that was included as a way for us to try to motivate people to, as much as possible, reuse. But I hadn't really thought about it in the environment of Ann Arbor and the impact that would have. So happy to have further conversations about that. Other than that, I really appreciated your comments. And Jan, do you have anything that you wanted to add?
I think just a couple things. One, I think it may be with the whole idea around reuse. It's not just that the whole building, but we don't do a very good job right now of construction recycling. We need to definitely, there's a lot of things that we can reuse or reprocess. And I think that might be able to be balanced in that resolution. The other thing around labor, I just want to say that one of the things that we are doing with the concrete piece is some training. And as it turns out, these materials tend to be easier once labor gets used to placing them. And so you can really get, I think, a win-win when you really look at the supply chain, the designers, the owners, and Chuck, I want to talk to you about steel.
Thanks, Jan and Luca. I see Jay has his hand up. I think Chuck and Robert, take your hands down. If you're done, leave them up if you still have another comment. Go ahead, Jay.
Yep, and I just had a quick maybe question or comment of maybe seeing if we could tie this into our recycling in the city. I don't know if we've rebuilt the material recycling center yet, or we're in the process of it, but if there's some way we could make a connection, kind of the circular economy of our, you know, who we're selling our glass to or something, if we could get our glass recycled from the city going to one of these, you know, ground glass places, or even if, you know, maybe we can promote a company, you know, starting up a factory here a little closer than in Connecticut or something. So maybe there's some way to tying it into our own waste stream to tie back into the city.
I can
Suggestion. Go ahead, Luca.
So yeah, that's a wonderful idea. Jay, thank you so much for bringing that up. We were thinking the same thing. We had talked to the company that's working in Connecticut, and we brought those samples because the hope was at some point that could be replicated. Obviously, transportation costs would be astronomical if we had to bring everything in from Connecticut, and it seems like there would be, you know, a suitable glass environment in the Michigan area to start something like that. So, you know, I think the tests are still ongoing with that concrete, so we want to see the performance before really moving forward with that. But it's something that the task force is really interested in moving forward with in any way.
Anyone else? I have a few comments and then a suggestion. So I made some notes. Hopefully I cover these all. First of all, I will take the blame or whatever for initiating the resolve clause about reusing buildings. And I'll give you a specific case that I had in mind. And it really had nothing to do specifically about the city of Ann Arbor. But it's my understanding the University of Michigan intends to tear down the Fleming Administration Building. You know, that there's obviously a hell of a lot of embodied carbon in a building like that. And that would, to me, be a prime case where the university should be engaging resources, including even student design teams, to look at how that building could be redesigned, repurposed, whatever, so that it doesn't have to be torn down. And I agree completely with some of the concerns that Councilmember Briggs mentioned about, you know, weaponizing this. And I think either possibly eliminating that clause and dealing with that issue separately, or refining the clause to make it clear that, you know, if you're looking at replacing a few small one-story buildings with hundreds of units where people will be reducing their vehicle miles traveled, where that building is being built to high environmental standards in the city of Ann Arbor, where it would be built outside the city of Ann Arbor to much, much lower standards with the commute, that if you look at the total life cycle of even losing the embodied energy in those few buildings and building a brand new building, the total life cycle emissions are much, much lower. And we need to argue on that basis. And I know there's a professor at UC Berkeley that's done analyses of urban lifestyles versus people commuting and shown that the overall CO2 balance is definitely in favor of urban density. Just this is not in any order. I think I may have mentioned this before. As you know, I'm your representative on the Environmental Commission. I'm in a working group that is working on a construction and demolition ordinance. So the idea, you may know that the Solid Waste Resource Management Plan has a small section on construction and demolition, primarily about just basically capturing data, but we'd actually like to get to an ordinance. There are a number of ordinances in the country, and so we're working on that. As far as the glass issue, Recycle Ann Arbor is really a mission-driven, vision-driven organization that we potentially could work with on recycling glass and getting it to a processor that could potentially use this glass or with its context, so that might be a possibility. Then refrigerants. We looked into that's in the 820 plan, reducing the use of these high global warming potential refrigerants, as Commissioner Hookham pointed out. most of those things are controlled by the EPA, and also the US government has recently indicated that the really high GWP refrigerants are to be ruled out. And so in terms of maybe influencing recovering practices, we might be able to do something there with education. But the sense was, at least my sense was, that we probably wouldn't get a huge return on our time invested there, since there's sort of outside of our influence of or our sphere of influence. And then just one other thing that I think, as we talk about changing the resolution, we could add certainly a lot more to it. There is a specific reference to working with the Washtenaw County Roads Commission. So roads, we definitely want to take as a part of what we're targeting here. And I think the other thing that we want to do when we look at modifying this is diluting our efforts. So we can have a resolution that says we're going to educate on 15 different things, but as Jan pointed out, the really big opportunities are in concrete and steel, and potentially with mass timber. That's more farther down the road. So what I was going to propose is that we put the resolution into a Google Doc, or we actually have it in a Google Doc, that we share that with the commission, and that we allow people to propose revisions and comments, and maybe set a deadline to that, and then hopefully take up the resolution again in our next meeting. And I wanted to put that out there for people's comments. Obviously, I didn't clear that with Jan and Luca before I said that, but I just wanted to run that by everybody to see if that makes sense. So I see Councilmember Briggs has her hand up, and then we'll take other comments as well.
Thanks, and I appreciated the thoughtful comments and replies on this, on my comments. And it makes sense in terms of next steps to be getting input from everybody. I did wonder if, considering what a big role Planning Commission and planning staff will have in this, in the execution of this, if it might make sense to either, obviously share this Google Doc with planning staff and get their feedback, or maybe actually do depending on what their availability is for a work session, to actually go and make this a similar presentation there and get a little bit of feedback about how they might see this playing out, so that we are kind of building this out the most productive way possible. I leave it up to you to figure out what makes sense, but I certainly think that the education around this and figuring out how we can do more than educate, but and be innovative, but and really push this would be great. But I think their buy-in and their input might be helpful.
Great idea. I have a question of Missy. Missy, we shared the resolution. Do you know if it was shared with planning, and if they came back with any specific comments?
It was only shared with staff in planning. It hasn't been shared with the Planning Commission. And just because I have the floor, I'm going to share. I'm not confident that you can be working on a resolution together deliberately. I think that you might be capable of sharing a document and adding comments, but you can't deliberate on them. I'm going to check. I'm sending a note to legal right now to confirm process forward, just to make sure. Like we can't have discussion back and forth. I know that.
Great. I appreciate you doing that, and certainly and keep us informed of what we can and shouldn't be doing. Commissioner or Councilmember Redina.
Actually, Missy just covered. I wanted to make sure as well that procedurally we were okay, because I know that sharing a doc like that and having the entire body work on it can probably get deliberative if people start adding comments rather than just suggestions. And so,
right.
So yeah, I would be interested to hear what Missy hears back. Obviously, comments could be accessible to the public if that document was shared in its entirety, but I'm not sure on the rules on that. So I just want to make sure that we're okay. And I also just wanted to thank everyone for the conversation on this. I feel like I'm learning a lot tonight, and I think it's been very helpful.
Right. Great. So I would suggest then, before we take any action, we get some feedback from legal through Missy, and any other recommendations, sleep on this for 24 hours, and then we will get back with you as far as what the process will be going forward. One other thing, I'd like to react to Commissioner Kleeve's comments, and I agree completely. educating, cajoling, etc., only gets us so far. I would say that probably the Michigan Building Code may provide some limitations, but we should see what we can do up to and to stretch that, and we'll try to incorporate that also into the document. Jan, you're going to be an expert on that, as well as potentially Luca as well.
John, I think specifically the capital improvements process. Capital improvements.
Okay.
You know, Luca mentioned methodology. That's what I'm thinking most specifically to include, you know, embedded carbon in the evaluation process for CAP.
Okay, good.
Luca's got a way to do that. Great. That makes it simple.
Good. Thank you. Anybody else have any suggestions or want to modify that proposed approach? Great. Several people said it, and I'll even add, even though I've been working on this with Jan and Luca, I learned a lot tonight also about different perspectives and the way this can be interpreted. So I think it was a valuable conversation, and I see that we're building momentum, and I sense that we have a lot of support, which is really positive. So I think once we have a good product, that hopefully this will sail through certainly our commission, and then hopefully we get an endorsement from planning, and then it can go to City Council for their review. Any other comments? So join me in thanking Luca and Jan for all their efforts on this and for joining us tonight. And you're welcome to listen in. We're going to have a presentation that you might be interested in, certainly Jan, about action on an ordinance for an energy benchmarking ordinance. And I think Jan maybe even been involved in some of the work on this. So we're going to have, I think, is it Zach and Thea, right? That are going to, they're listed there. There we go. They're appearing. So Missy, maybe I'll turn it over to you to introduce them and the subject, and should be another interesting conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chair Mirsky. Well, I am really excited to kick it over to our experts in this landscape now, and OSI, Zach and Thea. They are both members of the Office of Sustainability and Innovations, and they've been working for quite a few months on a commercial and multifamily benchmarking ordinance, as well as the home energy disclosure ordinance. But today we're going to focus on the benchmarking, and next month we're going to care about the home energy disclosure ordinance. So with that, I think in terms of sequencing, they'll tell you a little bit more about this. This will be the first read of a possible resolution of support, similar to what we just did, and then we can deliberate with the intent of the Commission considering for formal vote a resolution of support for benchmarking along with the ordinance itself that would go to Council, because we're nearly there. With that, I'm going to kick it to Thea and Zach to tell us a little bit more about what's in this benchmarking ordinance we've been working on.
Great. Can you see my screen okay? Cool. Over to you, Zach.
Cool. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us. As Missy mentioned, we're here tonight to introduce to you the Commercial and Multifamily Energy and Water Benchmarking and Transparency Policy. Say that 10 times fast. The agenda for tonight has the draft of the ordinance attached, but we're just going to present an overview of the background of the ordinance, its intended impact, some of the specifics of the policy, and then a few notes on implementation. So we'll definitely leave some time at the end for questions, but of course, feel free to jump in if you have any during. Okay, so we'd like to start at the beginning and sort of address why we have a proposed benchmarking and transparency policy to begin with. I'm sure, as most of you know, the City of Ann Arbor formally adopted the A20 plan to achieve a just transition to carbon neutrality by 2030. And it was just a year ago last week. We regularly track our community's greenhouse gas emissions, and we are far from reaching the pace of emissions reductions that are needed in order to achieve our goals. So we need to take specific action to accelerate that progress. Buildings are the single largest source of emissions in Ann Arbor. They represent over 2/3 of our total greenhouse gas emissions. The A20 plan includes specific strategies to not only power our buildings with renewable energy, but also to reduce the amount of energy consumed community-wide through energy efficiency improvements. This benchmarking ordinance that we are presenting on tonight represents one policy in a suite of programs that together will ultimately cover all building types and uses throughout the city of Ann Arbor. So this policy covers commercial and multifamily buildings, and we set out to find a way to improve the energy efficiency of these buildings. And it turns out that increasing efficiencies improves a lot of other things as well. Buildings become more affordable on a day-to-day basis. They become safer, healthier, and more comfortable for all of its users, the tenants, occupants, et cetera. And lo and behold, these all translate into fewer turnovers and longer tenancies. So people want to stay where they are because they're more comfortable for longer. I'd like to point out that we're not setting any precedent with this policy. And Thea, you can advance to the next slide. We found a best practice of benchmarking and transparency policies amongst over 35 other cities in the US, and that number continues to grow year over year. This map is small, but to give you a sense, we're talking about cities the likes of Seattle, New York, Chicago, and LA, but also some smaller cities like Des Moines, St. Paul, Columbus, and Berkeley. And these policies mean that at least a quarter of all US commercial building space in the United States already actively benchmarks their energy use. And these policies have proven results. Cities who have benchmarking policies see a 3 to 8% reduction in their overall energy use just through a benchmarking policy. To bring that locally, here in Ann Arbor, that correlates to over $2.2 million in savings for our community. So when a building owner benchmarks, they use basic building information like the size and use type, and combine that with their monthly energy and water use to measure their building's overall performance. And so these are the two elements that make up this policy. It's the benchmarking and the transparency. And so when you are looking at a building's overall performance, it allows easy understanding of relative performance, which means that it makes it comparable to other similar buildings. And it also highlights opportunities to cut waste and save energy by revealing low-hanging fruit for efficiency improvements. So that's from benchmarking. On the transparency side of things, when credible and consistent information on the performance of an individual building is shared with the public through transparency, that helps people who use the building, like renters and tenants and occupants, to include that information in their decision-making when choosing a place to rent. A very apt and common analogy that you hear when talking about benchmarking is like the miles per gallon of rating cars. During our stakeholder engagement process, we, after holding a task force, we put the draft policy out for public review. I just want to touch on a couple of the points that came back from a survey that we did. And these kind of highlight the importance of a benchmarking policy. Only 25% of the respondents agreed that property owners currently have the information that they need to easily identify energy and cost-saving opportunities in their building. So there's a lot of room for improvement for getting that information into their hands. Even fewer people agreed that tenants have a high consumer awareness of energy efficient buildings and are able to factor that into their decision-making. That touches kind of on the transformational side of this. We definitely want to make more tenants aware of that. And 61% of the respondents say that this policy will enable the market to value energy efficiency in buildings. So we demonstrate here a clear need for this policy. So how does benchmarking benefit users? Commercial buildings are unique in that the performance from one building to the next can vary wildly depending on its size, depending on its use, et cetera. You compare that say with the average single family home, which tends to have a pretty consistent energy consumption. And so there exists a need to fill this data gap and to establish clear steps and criteria to identify these opportunities and also to celebrate our successes as we move forward with this policy. Examining the energy use of a particular commercial building empowers building owners and property managers to take control of the energy they use through an easy to use online tool to manage their properties. And Thea will tell you a little bit more about that tool here in just a moment. Oh, and I have another slide here. So what are we trying to accomplish with this policy? You can jump back to that goals slide. Sorry about that. Some buildings in Ann Arbor currently benchmark voluntarily, but there isn't yet enough participation for us to start seeing the widespread benefits. And so by using a benchmarking and transparency policy, the goal is to scale these benefits to the entire community and include all commercial and multifamily buildings. And with more participation, we can streamline the process of giving building owners the access to their building data and improve their experience. And then we can also increase the demand for energy efficient buildings through the market transformation.
Cool, trying to get my mouse to work. Thank you, Zach, for that background and showing why benchmarking has been adopted in so many cities. Energy benchmarking is an easy to use tool, and I'll briefly explain how benchmarking policies operate to provide powerful data to building operators to help inform energy investments, and also to provide that data to the market to enable factoring energy performance into decision making. I know this is a bit of an overwhelming process, so I don't mean to go through all of it, but just as a general overview, in a benchmarking policy, the building owners of certain buildings are required to share benchmarking information with their local government. They do this benchmarking by gathering details on their space use from tenants and energy and water data from utilities. And then they input that data into the Energy Star Portfolio Manager, a free online tool. And then once a year, building owners report certain information from Energy Star Portfolio Manager to the city. In return, they receive individualized and actionable information to help when deciding what investments make sense for their buildings. Some of that information is posted on a public-facing website, like an interactive map, to help renters, tenants, occupants, and any other building stakeholder incorporate energy performance into their decision-making. So we keep saying that benchmarking is an easy and fast process. This is because it leverages Energy Star Portfolio Manager, a free online tool, and also a best practice used by a quarter of all commercial space in the United States, as Zach mentioned. A building can be entered for the first time in Energy Star Portfolio Manager in only a few hours. And after that initial account creation, each year energy data is simply uploaded, and that's made even easier when that can be automated, which is currently being piloted with the Ann Arbor 2030 district and DT. The Energy Star Portfolio Manager also creates an Energy Star score, which is a 1 to 100 numeric score available for most building types that summarizes how they're performing. The Energy Star score shows what percentile a building is operating in by normalizing for any factors that might affect energy consumption to compare buildings across a national population. And so any building that scores over 50 is doing better, is performing better than 50% of its peers. And those scoring over 75 are considered top performers and can even get an Energy Star certification, just like some appliances in your home might have. EPA has found that buildings that start with lower Energy Star scores and higher energy use achieve the greatest savings. Buildings with scores below 50 save twice as much as those starting with higher Energy Star scores. So it's a really quick and easy way for building owners to quickly understand how they're doing and understand if they have a great opportunity to start making improvements. So starting with these best practices from over 30 cities across the nation that have a benchmarking policy, we further refined what an energy benchmarking policy should look like for Ann Arbor in particular. We reached out to stakeholders to define the opportunity, co-create policy recommendations, and develop evaluation criteria. And so that's where we are now, but I'll run through some of the things that we've done to date as well. One of the first forms of public stakeholder engagement was a task force, which was conducted specifically to co-create that policy language with the community. We worked with multifamily and commercial building owners and property managers, the Housing Commission, energy efficiency contractors, city staff, including those from the Building and Planning Department. And through the process as well, we had an open email account. So even if somebody wasn't on that task force, they could still email us with any feedback or questions to what we were posting online. Once the policy language was drafted using recommendations from the task force, we put forward that to the general public through an open house. That was recorded and it's available on our website. And we also ran along an accompanying survey, which Zach has already mentioned some of the results from. We'll be meeting one last time with the task force later this week to share out our final recommendations. With that background, Zach is going to introduce some of the detailed recommendations for the Ann Arbor Commercial Energy Benchmarking Ordinance, starting with what buildings would be required to benchmark.
Unmute. Okay. All right. Thanks, Thea. So yeah, when we were talking about this policy, what buildings actually are going to be included in that, we determined based on best practices in other cities and on Ann Arbor's particular characteristics that all buildings greater than 20,000 square feet should benchmark. This will maximize the energy savings potential while minimizing the burdens on smaller buildings and city staff. And it would technically cover any building greater than 20,000 square feet. This is regardless of the building's use, meaning commercial, industrial, institutional, or multifamily. In the case with buildings with housing units, the building must have at least 4 units. So the intention here is to not cover small multifamily buildings. Of course, the city of Ann Arbor cannot mandate anything of buildings that are not within our jurisdictional hierarchy. So meaning state, federal, public university or public buildings, et cetera. We will recommend that they all benchmark, but we cannot actually enforce participation. That said, we'll work with them as much as possible. And all city buildings, City of Ann Arbor buildings will benchmark. I would also like to mention that the University of Michigan already does their own benchmarking for what it's worth. Why are we including multifamily buildings in the benchmarking? Well, that's because in Ann Arbor, multifamily buildings represent nearly half of all commercial buildings. Once you whittle that down to the 20,000 square feet or larger, that proportion only increases. So in order to include the majority of large buildings that would benefit from increased access to data and support to inform energy efficiency improvements, we decided to include multifamily buildings in this. Why did we choose to set that threshold at 20,000 square feet? Well, we sought to balance the intended outcomes like emissions savings and financial savings for a community with the number of buildings that would be included so that we could provide the best level of support possible. So looking at these graphs here, the top lines on either of these, we've got emission savings on the left and financial savings on the right. The top line on either of these represents the savings that a benchmarking policy would present. And you can see on that top line, kind of in the middle there's kind of a nook at the 20,000 square foot threshold. And so you see that the savings kind of begin to level out as you go below 20,000 square feet. The bottom line in either of these graphs shows the total number of buildings that are covered at each square footage threshold. After that 20,000 square foot mark, as you move to the right, you can see that the number of buildings exponentially increases after 20,000 square feet. So there are some other cities that with existing benchmarking policies that found owners in the 10 to 20,000 square foot market really struggled to comply with the policy. At the same time, the city struggled to provide enough support. Additionally, from a building science perspective, buildings that are in the 20 to 25,000 square foot range are on the low end of the threshold that benefit from benchmarking, similarly to what these graphs illustrate. And the smaller buildings, all the way down to single family homes, tend to benefit more from asset reviews like energy audits than they do from benchmarking. So in looking at Ann Arbor's building stock, you can advance. This table, the best practice is to phase in the requirement of buildings to begin benchmarking. And phasing is driven by square footage as written by this policy. We generally start with the largest buildings. Not only are there fewer larger buildings to support as we build out implementation, but larger buildings also tend to have dedicated building managers and increased staff capacity. So it's usually easier for them as well to get started right out of the gate. Thea will touch on this in more detail in a moment, but Ann Arbor's policy would start with city buildings initially. After a year, we would do 100,000 square foot buildings and larger. A year later, we would do 50,000 and larger, then 20,000 and larger. And what we want to point out with this table is that these thresholds, as they've been chosen, at this rate, these phases, it about doubles the number of buildings that are covered each year, each time we hit another threshold. What happens if the buildings are below 20,000 square feet, like including single family homes? As I mentioned earlier, smaller buildings can benefit more from things like energy audits, which help them identify energy investments without requiring them to annually monitor their energy consumption. So a home energy audit disclosure policy, which is something else that we're working on, would cover single family homes and horizontally stacked housing units like condos when those homes are sold. A similar policy to that could cover commercial buildings, the smaller commercial buildings. And finally, we're also working on a green rental housing standard that would protect renters by ensuring a bare minimum of comfort and utility affordability. I did say earlier that all buildings are covered, but there are some exemptions that building owners could apply for. They would have to apply for these exemptions annually. And these exemptions were decided upon with the help of the task force and based on legal recommendation. So just to touch on these briefly, buildings that could be exempt from benchmarking include those that are unoccupied, obviously, if nobody's there, underoccupied, which means that if it's a multiple unit building, that 50% or fewer of their units are occupied, or buildings that have plans to be demolished. There's a demo permit pulled from the building department. And finally, buildings that are solely owner occupied with no tenants could also apply for exemption from benchmarking. But there are some buildings that can still benefit from benchmarking, but could face harm if their information was made publicly available through the transparency element. So there are exemptions for that as well. These buildings, these include buildings whose energy might disclose trade secrets, like some industrial buildings or those that may reveal critical facilities like data centers, for instance.
Great, thank you, Zach, for that explanation on the choice of covered buildings to match, like we said, maximizing impact with the capacity of our community and our staff. So commercial benchmarking and transparency not only fills a data need, but it also incentivizes building owners to start making smart energy investments. When building owners benchmark, over 80% plan or implement efficiency improvements. Some of which of those are behavioral or operational changes that bring immediate and low cost reductions in energy consumption. Over 60% of facility managers that benchmark use it to help justify energy efficiency improvements. And a 2012 US EPA analysis of over 35,000 benchmarked buildings found an average annual energy savings of 2.4%, which increases up to 7% when they benchmark consecutively for 7 years, or for 3 years, I'm sorry. Along with providing useful information to building owners, market transformation driven from transparency is perhaps the most important benefit of energy benchmarking to our community. And it's now a standard best practice included in nearly all recent benchmarking ordinances in other cities. When we share information with stakeholders that's credible and consistent, they can start valuing that and including and budgeting for their expected utility costs in their decision into their decision making. It also allows us to celebrate those buildings that are high performers and inspiring those who aren't currently high performers to maybe see how they could become one. Lastly, it incentivizes building owners to improve building performance by providing, through that market transformation, by providing real benefits to making improvements and having a more desirable place for folks to rent or live. When we look at transparency in our public survey, we found that 80% of our respondents thought that transparency would increase energy efficiency improvements, and 70% thought that it should be included for most buildings. And just over here on the right side is a little example of some visualizations of what other cities have done. And they usually take the form of interactive maps. So what would benchmarking and transparency look like in terms of timing? As Zach mentioned, we're looking at doing 3 different phases. And before all of that, leading with city properties to show our own leadership and just to resolve any barriers or difficulties that might come up. The 3 phases are spaced 1 year apart, and they double the number of covered buildings each year. There's a deadline that's based in May for each year, and that's based on a national standard of May and June deadlines, so that if folks have properties that span multiple cities that also have benchmarking ordinances, they're not dealing with deadlines that aren't similar to each other. You'll note that the initial transparency begins 1 year after the initial benchmarking for each phase, which gives building owners a full year to see what their benchmarking results were and make those low cost improvements that can improve their score. Our task force recommended a longer timeline, which we felt did not meet the 820 goals and lost the benefit of market transformation. So we're continuing to work with our task force to create a system that meets the goals of 820 while recognizing the needs of our community. For building owners, tenants, occupants, and the market that is using this data, it's important that it is seen as high quality and dependable, which means that it needs to be accurate. Some of the actions we'll pursue to increase the accuracy of data generated through this policy include prioritizing adequate training and support, streamlining the data upload process and providing support there as well, reviewing any extreme values and outliers and revisiting them, leveraging the built-in data quality tool and Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and also incentivizing that buildings verify or certify the results using Energy Star Portfolio Manager's certification process. So kind of getting into how will we track progress? So we will track success of the program first by measuring compliance of buildings covered by the policy, with a SMART goal to reach 80 to 90% compliance of all covered buildings by 2025. And so to reach this, our priority will be to increase the number of buildings performing by providing support and identifying and resolving barriers. This includes working to expedite and simplify access to data and supporting buildings getting started with benchmarking through webinars, trainings, data jams, help centers, and partnering with the 2030 district. In cases where buildings consistently do not comply with the policy or might intentionally submit false information, enforcement in the form of fines will be used. So our SMART goal is based on compliance, and the policy was also incentivize energy efficiency improvements. So in general, an energy concierge can help step buildings through a process of doing an energy efficiency improvement and help secure financing through local resources like Michigan Saves or PACE. And so the energy concierge is something that our office has been working about developing and hopefully can be starting to get set up by the time these buildings are starting to benchmark. And then information from energy benchmarking can reveal what building types are the best candidates for energy efficiency improvements, allowing for more targeted supporting programs or incentives to be developed. Lastly, there's a few other ways that we can track progress as well, through energy and financial impacts, awareness on both the building owner side and also the market side, and then more widespread impacts like economic impacts on jobs and local economic development or workforce development and education. So I know it's way past 8, so I want to thank you for your time and open it up for questions.
Thank you, Zach and Thea. That was an excellent very professional presentation and really reflects the great work that you've done. We've got several people that are interested in commenting. I'm just going to go from the upper left in my screen. Commissioner McCoy.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That was really interesting and great to see. So thank you for your work on this. And I definitely agree with what Thea said at one point in the presentation, that I think for me, transparency seems to be the most important aspect in this. My only concern was that there seems to be a lot of homes in Ann Arbor that are converted into multifamily units. I've lived in one that was a multifamily home that was more than 4 units, shockingly. And there's also a lot of existing buildings that are smaller than 2,000 square feet. I think I've lived here for 6 years, and I think 4 different places within those 6 years, if not more than that. And all of them would not fall under these, like that threshold that you determined. And I think my concern particularly comes from, it seems that these multifamily units seem to be generally much older than the bigger units that are available, or the bigger buildings that are available. And so I would make an educated guess that they're also more inefficient. So I think if you're confident that this will be covered by a green rental housing ordinance, like that, concern is fine with me, but I just wanted to voice that. And I hope the green rental housing ordinance comes before us soon. I know we've been talking about it for a long time. And then my only other comment would be that for the task force, I think I would like to request that a task force that, involves a policy that impacts renters includes them as a constituency group. So I hope the same for the green rental housing ordinance. We're often left out of decision-making processes that impact us, even ones like this that would probably impact us in a positive way. So I just hope to see that included in the future. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Zucker.
I was going to say thanks again. That was a great presentation, and just a couple quick comments of, in the data age, I think just the collecting of this data is so valuable to learn from, and that hopefully we could also maybe use this in connection and cooperation with the previous topic, to help kind of guide decisions for when to reuse versus to rebuild. So maybe there's some kind of connections we can make between the data gathering and the embodied energy moving forward.
Thanks, Jay. Commissioner Hookham, and then Councilmember Briggs.
Yep, great presentation. Appreciate that. Just a recommendation, age is a lot of times a telling point for where we should be looking, but I've been on a lot of buildings in Ann Arbor. I can't even count how many that are in the 20,000 plus square footage, probably over 100 easy. And the telling issue is, if we could get a drone mounted infrared thermography camera, we could do it ourselves and pretty much find the buildings without getting too discriminatory. But really, infrared tells a tremendous story, particularly if you can get the roof component in. That's going to give you a lot of data on where things are at with a specific building and where to start. So good work. And I also wanted to add the Energy Concierge program is a great place to go to for helping assist in this space. Thanks.
Thanks, Chuck. Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, thanks. Great presentation, and sounds like it's going to have a lot of great outcomes. I just wanted to ask a little bit more about sort of the process that was being set up in terms of the reporting. I know the goal is to create accuracy. So, and how that data might be able to be compiled differently instead of having kind of multiple phases. So DTE, I know, sends me a monthly benchmarking report against how I fare against other homes. And so I was wondering if there was an opportunity for the city to get that information directly from DTE, if that was an opportunity, or if so that's the first question I have.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that now. Yeah, unfortunately, larger buildings can be a little bit more complicated than single family homes, which is a huge frustrating part, and actually a gap that we should have talked more about. So in multifamily buildings have multiple tenants, building owners don't automatically have access to information on how much energy their tenants are using or how their tenants are using that space. So it can be a bit of an involved process, getting all the information that they need. And then also we are working with DT on making that process easier with automatic data uploads. We're looking at starting doing aggregation thresholds. So if there's a certain number of tenants, building owners wouldn't need to get explicit authorization from each tenant while still protecting data privacy of all those. But I do see where you're coming from. I think out there, all of the data exists, and it would be great if we could just get it all in one place and it would be easy. But it is also balancing additional to the energy consumption information, also some information on how the building is used.
Yeah, okay, and that's part of it. I just wonder if there's, if we're having to work with DT already to make it easier for the building owners to get that information. It seems like it'd be easier for them just to provide authorization, upfront about providing that information to the city, and then some other information that we compile with it, and then almost the city provides information back to the building owners on an annual basis, as opposed to trying to get the information to the city and then get the information back out to the public. So if there's a way to streamline that and make it easier for folks, it seems like we end up with more accuracy. And then I wondered, obviously we're the water utility, so obviously we provide it. I was just looking at my information. It seems like we should be able to kind of create an algorithm where we have that information already ourselves, rather than maybe just asking for some baseline data to help inform that. Could you help me understand more kind of that process too?
Sure. So I think the powerful point is that providing that information in a way that's useful for building owners and the market to consume. And so right now, from a legal standing, I don't believe we can do the easy route of just asking DT for everyone's data and just sharing everyone's information without first working with them. So that's one thing that we're working through. But I do think while we do have the water data on hand, it's also helpful just to make sure it's in a really useful, a format for building owners to use. And then starting to get it also, if you're renting and want to know, am I going to pay a lot for water in this building? Having a bit more of an idea of what your expected utility costs might be.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I'm just trying to understand a little bit better the process of, instead of acquiring that information, kind of trying to drag that information out of folks and then communicate it back out to people, if we can somehow incentivize making that easier, and also doing some of the legwork on our end, so that is that we're making it really easy for people to do that. Since we have the water utility data, I guess I just maybe want a little bit more information about kind of that moving forward, and we could talk about it.
If I may, Councilmember,
yeah,
jump in on that too. Yeah, so the analogy, there's no question we can legally do benchmarking. The analogy that's been given to us is like a relationship that you have with your PCP, that I can't call and get Larry Kerber's medical records, but Larry could give permission potentially for me to get his medical record. He could give me his medical record.
Yeah.
And so that's the legal landscape utilities are operating in. And so we're trying to figure out how, it's not a legal question, it's a programmatic question. So Ian, Zach, and I are kind of working on staffing, like how many interns, how are we partnering with the 2030 district? What's the role for the concierge to really make this easy for people to get there? It's a heavier lift on our side than would be ideal, but how do we make it an easier lift for the buildings that are disclosing, if that makes sense?
Yeah, and that's sort of what I'm getting. I assume we couldn't just automatically get it, but that was kind of the piece around having the opportunity for them to authorize it, as opposed to having to give us data on whatever time cycle that we had wanted it at. And then there was I remember if there was one more question on this. Oh, I guess the other piece is obviously if there isn't compliance, what does enforcement look like? And I know you mentioned fines, but realistically, what's that look like?
Yeah, we have a backup slide that I'm happy to pull up. So, oops. Oh, it'd be helpful if I didn't overshoot it. Apologies for this. Cool. So the current fine structure is based off of recommendations from other cities. And so it's set at a level that would potentially be more expensive than paying someone to benchmark for you. And so that's why the starting level is $500 every 90 days after 30 days of a written notice of not being in compliance. And additionally, we also understand that there might be some difficulties or burdens getting up and running. So we really want to focus on, if someone's not in compliance, helping them get in compliance versus just defaulting to only levying a fine.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I guess, my hope out of this is that, this is a great program. I think it's going to offer, the outcomes are really good. Just making sure that we are not sort of, I guess, the government is being seen as sort of a partner that's really helping to facilitate and make this easy, and to help building owners and make better choices in the future, as opposed to kind of being yet another thing that sort of people groan that, okay, now the city needs us to do this, and it's becomes really challenging to find the staff and the time to be able to enforce effectively. So those are my only concerns with it.
Commissioner Kerber. You're muted.
So thank you for the presentation. It's quite interesting. One of the things that I just observe in visiting buildings is just how much energy is wasted. And I've seen estimates that the amount of energy that's wasted is in the neighborhood of sometimes 30 to 40%. You see it just going out the doors. The doors are open. I mean, so much of it is just not being taken, seriously. So this is certainly a step in that direction. But when I saw the presentation and I saw the average building that does benchmarking gets 2.5% savings, and I'm kind of shocked. I mean, that seems to be a relatively small number, considering how much energy is actually going out the door, how much being wasted. So I guess my question is, once you have this data, what steps would be taken to get that 2.5% to something really, really more significant? 2 or 3 times that would be the minimum, in my opinion, because there's so much that's there that could be saved.
Thea or Zach, you want to tackle that, or?
Sure. Oh, go for it, Zach.
We work together a lot. Can you tell? Yeah. So what could potentially happen is there could be a follow-up policy to this that would implement standards that would encourage folks to go beyond that, beyond what the benchmarking reveals through the low-hanging fruit. But for now, I think we're focused on giving building owners the tools that they can use to manage their data. I think that's a really critical first step to anything else that could eventually come down the pipeline, if it ever were to. We want to make sure that we're setting building owners up for success in a program like this, and are equipping them with the data management tools that they would need for that to be successful anyhow. See anything to add to that?
Yeah, go for it.
Go ahead, Thea, and then Missy.
I just wanted to say there's a lot of great processes once the building is benchmarking, not reinventing the wheel, to start incrementally making improvements. And so having a citywide policy puts us in a really great position to start knowing who to help with that policy, or not policy, with that process. But I know other folks have their hands up.
Missy?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on that and say I think it's a really good point, Larry, and to Councilmember Briggs' kind of question about support. What this will give us is really much more nuanced information about our, if you will, high flyers and our areas for significant improvement. And so we can then be much more surgical with limited resources in helping those folks improve. And that's information we just don't have today. So I think you're right. If my understanding is from the research, this is what happens on its own without a supporting ecosystem. As you know, we want a supporting ecosystem. So we expect further, deeper, faster improvement. We just don't have, there aren't a lot of examples for us to point to with data. So we'll have to be on the vanguard on this one.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cleary.
I want to encourage you guys to not underestimate the amount of hand holding that this is going to take when you start working with these companies. Just make sure you budget for enough time and resources and stuff, because I think that's going to initially suck up more time than you think. We average, when I was at the energy office, we found that it took roughly an hour and a half to get per account to get the data from the utilities. That's after being put on hold and dropped calls several times. When I worked with the Energy Star, earlier iterations on Portfolio Manager, we found the same thing, that, unless you got a full-time energy manager, this is hard. And so I think the energy consigliere is a really important thing. And I encourage you to think through how much effort you're allocating for hand-holding and helping people get into the system initially.
If I can comment on that quickly before I go to Commissioner McCumber. Jan Culbertson was mentioned earlier, and she's been involved in this. And some of you might be aware of the fact that the Ann Arbor 2030 district is doing a lot of work in this area, interfacing with DTE and Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And they're working on some processes that would automate some of this, Mark, and hopefully address some of your issues. I'm sure there's going to be hand-holding in the beginning, but they're paving the way for that. Obviously, on the back end of this is probably going to be a lot of hand-holding as well, too, to start helping people. Commissioner McComber.
Yeah, thank you, John. You kind of partially answered my question or addressed it, which is, unless I missed it, I didn't hear that progress had been made on talking to DTE about creating a data bridge. And my understanding is that that's a kind of a critical piece of the successful benchmarking ordinances in other cities. So I'm wondering if Zach and Thea can talk to that point a little more.
Zach or Thea, do you want to add to what I said? Do you have any more additional details to share?
Yeah, I mean, so it is currently a pilot underway where DT is explicitly working on making that automatic data upload from their system into Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So it's a work in progress. I don't think it's as beautiful or as seamless as everyone wishes it were, but we're excited to see where that goes. I think also we're not the only city now in Michigan that's looking at doing this. And I think as we see more and more cities starting to come out with these ordinances over the next couple of years, that there'll be more and more pressure from utilities, even if it's not set up right away, for them to set it up soon, because there'll be a lot of demand for this data. So it'll be perhaps a customer service providing.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have a few, hopefully, that we can take care of a minute apiece. A 1-minute update on the timing for the home energy audit disclosure ordinance. That was mentioned. What's the timeline?
Yeah, so that also went through legal review, and I think we had a good clearing. So our next step is going to do some stakeholder engagement based off of that. And then I'm not sure what the timeline was for bringing it to the Energy Commission. I'll bump that back to Missy. Yeah, next month we had planned to have the first reading of the resolution.
Okay, great. A couple of comments that hopefully are helpful. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for an explanation on the threshold. And what I would encourage, some related to that, but just in general, is that since this is a new program, that there's something that triggers, whether it's in the resolution or whether it's just someone going into their calendar, that we review this ordinance for how successful it is, where there's bugs where we can improve it, whether or not the threshold should be increased or decreased, or whether we should stretch out the timeline, but just maybe something that reviews this once a year for the first couple of years or something like that. And then finally, I just wanted to, I think it's finally, yeah, I think it's the only important thing. The University of Michigan has a Office of Student Affairs, and since the University of Michigan has also declared a path to carbon neutrality and set some targets, that office has an off-campus housing website. And it seemed to me we could collaborate with them to potentially get some of this information out to renters, pushing, sort of go back to maybe a little bit to Commissioner McCumber's statements, to get this information listed on that website. We've also talked with CIMI about potentially getting listed also on that website, whether or not they have EV charging. It's just, if we start to trigger landlords to start to think about, oh, this information is starting to get out in the public domain, then that may start to encourage them to actually take action. So just wanted to offer that up as a suggestion. With that, unless somebody else has any other comments, we can start to wrap this up with the reports. Thanks again, Thea and Zach. Appreciate your burning not quite the midnight oil with us, but nevertheless, thanks a lot.
Thanks for having us.
Okay. Okay, we're going to get this meeting done so that it's not dark where Noah and Missy are sitting. So next is energy report, news from the Office of Sustainability and Innovation, and also from commissioners. And Missy, if you would like, I'll give you an opportunity maybe to address the callers' questions about the landfill solar. So if you want to, you can do that now, or we can maybe do that some other time depending on time.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I know we're running late, so I will share with the commission after this. We just released to council last night a one-year report on A20 that chronicles some of the major things that we've worked on and what's coming next. I'm just going to send that to everyone. The highlights are we're coming off of a really fun and exhausting A20 celebration week. We had 23 events last week over 6 days. We got to interact with hundreds of different Ann Arborites, and it was really invigorating and delightful. I will share, I think it might be of interest to this group, John referenced it earlier, that we just did a data pull and we're automating a lot more of our data. And one of the things we noticed is as of days ago, I think it was as of yesterday, we have almost the same number of solar permits pulled that we had in all of 2020. So we're 6 permits short, and it is June. That was as of June 7th. So we will absolutely continue just blowing the roof off of solar permits. We have multiple solarized programs running. We've got some big ones coming down the pipeline. So it's looking really great. The other thing I wanted to share to Mr. Garber's comments is tomorrow the Michigan Public Service Commission has their meeting in which they will make a formal ruling on the settlement and the VGP case, of which settlement was recommended by the parties involved. And then there's one issue that the administrative law judge ruled on. And just want to share, as we think about the landfill solar project that's in there, one is the cost estimates were really generated absolutely randomly by folks in a conversation, especially with the media. So sometimes people talk about $40 or $50 million. We don't have costs. Where we are in that process is we've done the technical studies to show that the site actually can take an injection of 24 megawatts, which is a lot of power at a given site. And so we understand the upgrades that would have to happen at DTE's power sites in order to take that infusion. And we are about to go to council at their next meeting asking, as part of a traditional contract with Tetra Tech, a small, pretty modest, I think it's roughly $60,000 increase to do the environmental impact assessment at the landfill, which is the last phase. After that comes back, which I'm going to assume is going to come back pretty great because we do a lot of monitoring at the landfill. We already know a lot about that site because of it being a landfill. Then if everything is cleared, we go to bid and we start getting actual pricing. So at that point, we'll be able to talk about what this project would cost and whether we want to proceed. It is true that we did negotiate with DTE that they would own the asset this time. And the reason for that is because it's a capped landfill. The liability associated with a capped landfill, you can imagine if Mr. Clevey was one of the subscribers and his air quote panel broke that capped landfill, he is legally liable for all of the improvements on that landfill. And we didn't think that was the best way to come into community solar. And so instead, we have offered it up as an anchor tenant program where people can subscribe and get the benefits of that without having the liability associated with that asset. It's also a bridge to true community solar where we have actual community ownership. And we're excited to be working with a number of different stakeholders on that as part of other initiatives that we're working on. But this is kind of that bridge. It's also the largest undeveloped property that we have in the city, and really the only site we have that's viable for this kind of volume of energy production. So it is not a go, it is not defined, but what we got, and hopefully what we'll get tomorrow, I think around 3 o'clock is when the ruling will come down, is permission from the commission, an agreement that DTE and Ann Arbor will work in good faith to see this project through to final costing and make a decision about how best to proceed. And that is something we cannot do outside of this filing. DTE, there is no need for them to have to say, yes, this filing is how we got to that point. And there are other things I know we talked about in our last commission meeting that we were able to get through intervention. Those are just some of the things I wanted to share. We're really excited to see the rooftop solar work progressing. And hopefully by the end of this year, you'll see even more solar on city facilities. Stay tuned for more.
Thank you, Missy. Mark, I see you have a hand up, and then I'll also open it up to other commissioners for news, important updates, etc. Go ahead, Mark.
Just quickly, I just want to remind everyone that the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association was the first organization outside the city to endorse that project, and we continue to be really happy with the way that it's unfolding and the work that Missy's doing on this thing. So the best of all worlds we're getting now. It'd be great if the utilities would change their business model to be more in line with Ann Arbor, but whatever. Thanks, Missy. Great job.
Others? I have a question while other people mull over whether they have a question. In an email exchange with another commissioner, actually Commissioner Kerber, I was wondering if there's anybody that can advise us as a group, or also maybe acting individually, how we can positively impact legislation that is being considered at the state level to address the cap on distributed generation. Any thoughts that anybody wants to share on that? There's been letters been sent out by GLREA recommending writing members of the House committee. Beyond that, anybody else want to comment? Chuck.
So I can't talk on behalf of the utility, but I will say something that I think is pretty important. I've mentioned this probably in the past, that the 1% cap was there. It was put in place so that we avoided an avalanche of applications. And it took about 1.5 to 2 years for, maybe more than that, more like 3 years, for the actual applications to approach that percentage. It took so long that bumping it by 100% more seemed to make logical sense. And then we'll see what that trajectory looks like to get to 2%. I don't think, in talking with my brethren, if there's any barrier to keep going. The barrier is really based on the infrastructure that exists. Missy mentioned that the injection of the landfill solar at one of the DTE, I think 46 kV circuits, is at the maximum limit. We have these infrastructural issues that if we slam circuits with solar, the circuits become impacted negatively. So we have to go in pieces, and this is part of the planning process, just to avoid overload, if you will. I'll just say it at a high level. I could get into some really deep weeds if you wanted me to talk VARs and reactive power and capacitors and things like that, but I'll stop.
I'll open it up again for general news and updates or comments from commissioners.
One thing quickly I did want to share, and I apologize for not bringing this up before, is that there is another bill that we're watching pretty closely, and it very candidly is targeted at us, which is the ban on the ban. So there is a proposal to ban municipalities from banning natural gas infrastructure, which, as you know, is not something that we have explicitly called out in A20, but we're watching that really closely. And there was supposed to be a vote on it today, but it got pulled for some reason. And there are a number of different opportunities for folks to sign on and share support, however you support or don't support that resolution.
Thank you. Anyone else? Otherwise, we'll go to working group updates. Okay, working group updates. The only one I think that is still really functioning is transportation electrification. Carlene, can I ask you to give us a brief update on that?
We've been in discussion this month about figuring out how we can support multi-unit dwellings to have electrification for EV charging. We're just exploring what the biggest challenges are right now and what we can do to, as a city, to help folks to make those transitions.
Just add one other thing to that. The working group had a presentation from May Mobility back in April. And May Mobility is a Ann Arbor-based company that is developing and launching autonomous vehicles, in several cases EV vehicles. And they just announced and are launching a program in downtown Ann Arbor in conjunction with a number of other entities to run a pilot essentially in Ann Arbor. They've run pilots in Grand Rapids and in Columbus, Ohio. So we're happy that they're doing that here. And I encourage you to check out their website and to hop a ride with them and see what it's like to run on an autonomous EV vehicle. So it's a shuttle actually. Anything else, Carlene or Missy? Otherwise, I'll give an update. Okay, I'll give an update on the Environmental Commission. So as usual, look to Legistar if anything I tell you sounds interesting. We had an update from the city on the GIS tools that the city has for natural features. It's actually a really cool website where you're able to look at all different kinds of natural features, from trees to forest fragments to wetlands, topography. There are photographs that you can look at dating back to 1947 up to essentially through the present that you can overlay on those to see how tree cover has changed and so on and so forth. So if you're interested in anything related to natural features, the city offers that, and also Washtenaw County does as well. So if that's a tool that could be of interest to you. We had a presentation from a Seas group that is working with the Natural Features Working Group of the Environmental Commission and the city on a project to enhance that data. They are going into selected plots and identifying tree species, and they're matching that with remote sensor data, LiDAR data, and some other data to be able to do a much more complete mapping of the tree canopy in Ann Arbor that would allow even the identification of individual species. That's particularly helpful. For example, if we want to attack invasive species and also, have a good sense of where we have particularly important specimens that are not lining the streets and where we have information maintained by the city. The other thing that we did is we handled a number of issues related to the Gelman plume, had a report on some issues perceived by the city and others related to the monitoring program that Gelman has proposed. There was a resolution that was considered and passed. And then finally, let's see, what was the last thing? Oh yeah, there was some just quick discussion about how the new ADU ordinance might affect natural features. And that was just discussed, that was tabled. We didn't take any action on that. So those are things that were discussed in the Environmental Commission. I think that's it, unless anybody has any questions for any of us. Otherwise, we'll move to public comment. So I have to read my spiel here. This is the second and last opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes and provide public comment. If you're watching on CTN, call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter the meeting ID 913-57-83-4502. This information is also displayed in the meeting agenda and on the video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand and indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone and you will hear an automated message that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area, move any background noise on televisions so that we can hear you clearly. And then finally, please state your name and where your address is at the beginning of your comments. Nobody. Okay, we'll wait 30 seconds. And lastly, while we're waiting that 30 seconds, I thought I would just mention, I talked at the beginning of the meeting, we had a number of people stepping off the commission. We're in the process of reviewing applications. The mayor ultimately makes nominations and those are voted on by city council. But Missy, Josh, Carlene, and I are looking at applications. We met once to look at those. We had a really big and excellent slate of candidates. And so we're working on filling those positions. And hopefully we'll have action on that soon and have some new members of the commission. Missy, anybody? Okay. So items for the next meeting agenda. Any proposals? Ember, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have 2, but I have a question first. It says on the agenda that the next meeting is in August. So is next month the working meeting or is our next meeting for July?
Actually, we talked about meeting agendas going forward. August, typically, we haven't had meetings just because there's a lot of people that are traveling or vacation or summer break kind of stuff. So we haven't finalized either of those. We also typically have working sessions. Missy or Carlene, we didn't.
We added it as a discussion to say, should we meet in August? Because I think we weren't sure. So we wanted the body to decide. That's why it was on there. Yeah.
Yep. So what are people's thoughts? Let's see, I had a piece of paper with a bunch of different ideas that we talked about. I don't know, Missy, do you have them in front of you by chance? Let's see here. So July, we talked about, as Missy mentioned earlier, the home energy disclosure ordinance. And we also talked about getting an update from Matt Grokoff on what's going on at Viridian at County Farm. They have some interesting developments there with a microgrid and solar and things like that. So that was one of the things that we talked about doing. And then, yeah, so those are some possibilities for a July meeting. Are people up for a July meeting? Anybody else propose other topics? I mean, yeah. One topic is clearly reconsidering the resolution that we talked about this evening as well on low embodied carbon and construction.
And benchmarking if possible.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's good to go over both of those things. I had 2 other things that I was going to propose for topics for next month or whenever it's in the future. One is that I would like to request that we invite the Ann Arbor for Public Power group back for follow-up conversation, since there were some lingering questions from commissioners, continued issuance in the public comments, and then follow-up from Paul Fenn's presentation that Ken mentioned. And I'd also like to propose a resolution around this. And the other thing is I'd be interested in follow-up to the RMI beneficial electrification presentation we heard last month with some conversations around next steps. So I'm not sure if this is being talked about in a working group for electrification, but I had a conversation recently with a homeowner who is trying to electrify, and they identified several barriers, even though they're interested in taking the next steps on their home. And I can send a detailed list of what they told me for whenever we discuss this, but basically they were saying that there's a dearth of heat pumps available in the area, and there's more interest than there are pumps available right now, partially because of the presentation around heat pumps that had happened. And there's also a need for contractors who are able to do this work. And then of course there's huge issues with cost parities and billing issues to standard systems. So I thought that, you know, these all seem to be ones that can't be bared by individual homeowners or business owners, and that we should be, you know, working collectively to try to make it so that these aren't things that would impede someone who's interested from doing these on their home. And I also just wanted to add that I really appreciated that both presentations today were both really informative, but also came paired with ordinances. So I just really like the model of learning and then being able to discuss and take action on what we've learned, or maybe what we've already known but got reviewed. So thanks.
Excellent points. Missy.
Ember, to that point, if you could send anything that you have from the resident to us too, this is one of the things that is the priority for the second year of A20 for staff. So we are actively working on massive electrification work and support services, contractor training, manufacturer discounts, homeowner incentives. And so please, 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 would love the commission to take it up too, but don't wait. If there's something we can do, we stand ready on that.
Yeah, actually, there's something that I failed to mention too, as far as working group updates. There is a working group that is focused on concierge services. We're in the information gathering phase. Chuck is on it, Wayne Appleyard, Josh, a couple other people I'm sure I'm forgetting. And we've divided that up, and we're in the process of soliciting information from other cities on their programs. So that will also hopefully address some of these issues that you're referring to, Ember. But yeah, there's also supply chain issues and trained technician issues and a whole bunch of things like that all impact us. So I noted your comments. I think it sounds like we're up for a July meeting. Anybody have a problem with that? And then in our July meeting, we can talk about the August meeting, and generally Missy, Joss, Carlene, and I have a meeting a week before that where we're talking about agenda ideas. So hopefully we'll be able to bring a proposal about August to the meeting in July. How does that sound? Okie doke. So I think I'm the one that's fading the most, and almost you're losing me. So it's an appropriate time to adjourn this meeting, and thank everybody for your attention. I enjoyed the meeting. Mark, go ahead. You have raised your hand.
At the end, Missy and Paul are going to be presenting the GLRA's Clean Energy Seminar this Thursday, talking about community choice aggregation within the context of Michigan's current electric choice law. So that's going to happen. And then Ember, we're also having a community choice Clean Energy Seminar on municipalization later this in August as well. So both of these things I think are important. So you're all invited as usual to tap into that presentation on Thursday.
Thank you, Mark. Great. It is 8:54. Thanks everybody for hanging with us, including the sun. And I hope you all have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.